Hey folks, welcome back to Set Apart Homestead. Are you ready for war? How about a culture war? Well, we've been in a culture war for a long time, at least a century, but I think that we have been feeling it for the last couple of decades, and just in the last couple of years, it's been ramping up big time. How does a culture war affect us? How can it affect us? Is there a potential for this culture war to become a real war, maybe a civil war, where it becomes physical and violent? Well, I think we're already seeing the beginnings of that. We are seeing violence. We're seeing protests that erupt into violence. We're seeing individuals committing violent acts based on their political, ideas. So I think the potential for that is happening already, and I think it's something that you and I need to be aware of. The conservative right has definitely, for the first time in a long time, kind of stepped up to the plate and is actually passing some laws that I like. In the last few days and few weeks, several states, including my own, has worked and is working to, ban abortions, restrict them and ban them. Gun laws have changed a lot in the last couple of years in many states, including my own. So we're seeing this kind of rejuvenated energy in the conservative right, when for it seems like so long, whether they were Republican or Democrat, things were just kind of moving towards the left constantly, and they still are. But I think we're seeing, maybe it's that last bit of energy before they fall off the edge of the cliff of fighting back for conservative ideas. I'm not necessarily a political person in the sense of beholden to any party. I consider myself extremely independent, but definitely in the conservative libertarian side of things. But I think that this culture war is becoming serious, and it's becoming something that we need to be aware of. We need to be aware of it because the warring factions between the two cultures, at least two, it's becoming quite hostile. It's becoming verbally hostile, and it's becoming actually physically hostile. And so the potential for this to erupt into more of a physical civil war, I think the odds are kind of increasing in that area. And for those of us that prepare for things, for those of us that may find ourselves more on the right-leaning conservative side of things, we need to be aware of it, because I think the left, they're going to put up one heck of a fight. They're not going to stand by and allow these conservative laws to be passed and principles to be reenacted into law, and just do nothing about it. There's like I said, there's these various states that are getting passed, these laws that are getting passed. And I think, for instance, the issue of abortion, I've heard a lot of people just looking around on, like if a news agency posts, a link to a certain state that's passed a abortion ban, there'll be a lot of people chime in and say, yeah, but, it's unconstitutional because Roe v. Wade is still law. I have a feeling that most of these states are passing these laws to push the Supreme Court to revisit Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court's job is obviously to interpret the law and to, judge whether it is a constitutional or not law. And one of the main things that their purpose is when states kind of differ from the law. If a state passes a law that contradicts federal law, or if a state passes laws that, opposing another state, that's one of the Supreme Court's main purposes, is to kind of, figure out the balance between state and federal laws. Well, if you have a federal law, case law that says, Roe v. Wade, that abortion is legal, and then you have all these states saying, well, it's not, you have a constitutional issue that the Supreme Court must address. And so I believe that's probably an underlying reason of why these states are passing these laws, because they're trying to push the Supreme Court to revisit Roe v. Wade, because, as you all know, the conservatives, hold a pretty good majority on the Supreme Court right now. And I think that's, one of the main reasons why you're seeing these states pass these laws. They're trying to, the conservative states are trying to push the Supreme Court to revisit. And then, of course, that's just like throwing gasoline on a fire with the liberals, because that's one of their things, Roe v. Wade, that's their, one of their prized possessions, their bounties of war that they won. And if they lose that, I think they'll just about lose their mind. And we're seeing more divisiveness. At least I see it since in my lifetime, more divisiveness, more division amongst the people than ever before, and it's quite hostile. And what that boils down to for you and I is that we need to find a place that we're prepared in our lives for what could come. And it's very possible that in our lifetime we could see more higher levels of violence. Will it be anything like the Civil War of the 19th century? No, not going to happen. You're never going to see that kind of war again, at least not in the United States, I believe. But we could definitely see a lot more violence. We could see laws being passed that would, restricting more guns, restricting religion, restricting pretty much anything that would be conservative. They're going to fight really hard to get back into office and to get back into power. And when they do, we're going to see some pretty radical ideas being proposed and probably being passed. So, got mosquitoes out here flying around me. I'd rather have a tick on me than a mosquito. So what I'm saying is, I'm not sitting here telling you anything you probably don't already know. I think this culture war is it's ramping up big time. And yeah, I know most of the threats of violence comes from, the keyboard peckers, sitting there talking about, yeah, well, I'll do this to so-and-so as they're sitting in mommy's basement. I get that. But there are a lot of these, communist kids out there with the little black masks and red masks on, trying to act all tough and being violent. And, they may not know what they're doing, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't hurt someone. So you and I need to be aware of this, in all of our thoughts of preparations of disasters and stuff. This is one that we could definitely see, and I think that there's a lot of biblical reference that kind of points us in that direction, of the world becoming more wicked, because the world becoming is more and more unrighteous, and that is what is prevailing. And there is this pushback for the last few conservative moral principles are pushing back, and as we push back against the immoral wickedness, they're going to push a lot harder. And the reality is, on a global perspective, they have a lot more support behind them than we do. If there ever was some type of civil war, organizations like the UN and most of the rest of the world is going to basically back them up, and probably not going to back us up. So, how does that, relate to us? How do you, bring that down to your own level? Awareness. You've got to be aware of this that's going on, aware of what they're their agenda is. Their agenda isn't, you know, like it was 30, 40 years ago, where it was just, you know, well, we're helping out the poor, and we're, you know, the underprivileged people out there get an education. It's not like that. I believe that there's a definite agenda to socialize and basically create a communist nation of some sort. And they may not even use the term communist. It doesn't matter. The terms are irrelevant. It's what they're doing. They, you know, there's a certain division of classes of people. You have now the upper elites, and then you have all the rest of the poor slobs at the bottom, and they like that. They, you know, those that rule and those that control things, they see the world that way. They see themselves as this, you know, high elite, and the rest of us are little ants, you know, doing our little work. And those of us that are, you know, very independent and freedom-minded, we don't get that. We don't agree with that, and when we're not going to go along with it. And so that's when you're going to start seeing, you know, a real uprising between the two cultures of people. And I think all this stuff of this agenda of pushing, you know, things like gay and transgender and abortion and all this other stuff, I think it's just it's more of this their distraction. It's a distraction, you know, because those groups of people are actually pretty much a minority in our country, and I think that the left is giving them platforms to distract. And it causes the right to become enraged when we hear this kind of stuff, and it distracts us from what's really going on behind the closed doors, which is a gradual takeover, and it's not so gradual anymore, of our nation and of our rights and liberties. So be aware of this culture war, and be aware of probably the real intention that's going on. You know, I'm not an expert in this. I'm probably just standing here blowing out steam out my mouth that may not mean anything, but I think I'm on to things for the most part. I think I'm pretty aware and awake, and can kind of see through their smoke screens. And, you know, we've got definitely a division in our nation all over the place. And it's not just, you know, I can remember back when I was a kid, you know, most people thought the division was basically the East and West Coast versus the rest of America, and it's not that way anymore. Yeah, there's probably more conservatives in the Midwest and middle parts of the country, but there's definitely a lot more liberal-minded people spread all over the United States. And you look at statistics of young people, generation, whatever the young, not hipster generation or whatever you call it. It's not it. The millennials. That's what my son is in a millennial generation. I always tease him and call him the hipster generation. He gets frustrated at that. I'm not a hipster at all, Dad. And he's not. But anyways, the millennials, and then the generation after them, I can't even slip my mind whatever they're supposed to be called now, the younger ones. If you look at the statistics, most of them are very left-leaning, regardless of what part of the country that were born and raised in. So, in a lot of ways, our numbers are kind of dwindling. And as we become more of a minority, you're going to see more and more pushback from the conservatives, and then as we push back, the left's going to push back, and then that's when you have this explosion of civil war between the two cultures. And then what does that mean for us? You know, they're going to come after your guns. They're going to come after, you know, other things, especially if there was some type of civil war, you know, things like your land and your preps and supplies, you know, they're going to try to take that stuff. They've already taken over so many churches and stuff that there's these feel-good Chrislam churches, or whatever you want to call them. And, you know, they've taken over the children's minds because they pretty much own the schools now. So, you know, it's almost like you have to bug out to your homes anymore and close yourself off from the rest of the world to raise your family because of the you know, wickedness and the unrighteousness and the vulgarity that's out there in this world. You can't even watch TV anymore, which probably shouldn't anyways, because of it. So we're seeing this rapid, really, I think it's been going on for a long time, but it seems to me in the last, you know, couple of years at least, that the buildup is getting faster. It's expanding faster, this buildup. It's like a big balloon, and I think someday it's going to pop, and I think that day isn't too far off. Maybe it's this next big election will be that day. Who knows? But anyways, I don't know that I have a whole lot to bring to you. It's just something to be aware of, and I know most of you are. That this culture war is kind of beginnings of a civil war, and it could become more violent and more dangerous. It's not just, you know, hearts and minds that's being waged over. It could become more physical, and I think that's something that is preparedness-minded people, and as probably most of you are right-leaning people, and I'm not putting down any of you that aren't. You're welcome to watch and tell me how much you hate me on the comments. That's fine. It's coming to us more and more, and we need to be aware of it, because I have no doubt that if the left regained control and the people that they're putting up for presidency now, they're going to do a lot more than the things that they're going to make. I think they'd make probably President Obama look like a conservative. Let's put it to you that way. So something we all need to be a little bit more aware of than probably we are. All right, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.